I'll never forget the sound of my 82-year-old grandpa's garden hose hitting the dirt as Karen's boyfriend, Mike, stormed across our lawn, waving a clipboard like it was a sheriff's badge and yelling, "This ends now." It was a sunny Saturday in June, and I was sipping iced tea on the porch of our little house in Maple Grove, a sleepy retirement community in suburban Ohio, when this wannabe dictator decided our sprinkler was a threat to national security. My grandpa, a Vietnam vet with hands steadier than a surgeon's, just stared at him, hose dripping, while I choked on my drink. That's when I knew. This wasn't just another Karen tantrum. This was war. Hey, if you're new here, drop a comment and let me know what you'd do if some fake HOA tyrant came for your grandpa's garden. Because trust me, this story's about to get wild. I'm Josh, by the way, 31, jobless after a tech layoff, and currently crashing at my late mom's old place to help Grandpa Sam keep his sanity in this so-called peaceful neighborhood. Maple Grove's the kind of place where the biggest drama should be whose dog peed on the hydrangeas, but Karen had other plans. She's not your average busybody, blonde bob, yoga pants, and a voice that could shatter glass. No, she's a self-crowned HOA queen in a neighborhood that doesn't even have an HOA. And Mike? Her new sidekick, a guy with a knockoff security vest and the confidence of a mall cop on a power trip. It started innocently enough. 2 months back, I just moved in, juggling Zoom interviews and watering Grandpa's prized roses. Those flowers were his pride, a little legacy he'd built with my grandma before she passed. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly retirees sipping lemonade and swapping stories about the good old days. Then Karen showed up at our door with a notice printed in Arial 12, claiming Grandpa's mailbox was 0.3 inches too close to the curb per her imaginary HOA rules. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. Grandpa didn't. He just squinted at her through his bifocals and said, "Lady, I survived Hanoi. Your tape measure doesn't scare me." But Karen wasn't fazed. She escalated. Notes about unapproved lawn ornaments, like the tiny frog statue Grandpa loved, started appearing taped to our door. Then came the passive-aggressive waves from her porch across the street, where she'd sit with her iced latte, glaring at us like we'd personally offended her zinnias. Mike joined the circus a few weeks later, strutting around in cargo shorts and aviators, muttering about community standards into a Bluetooth headset that wasn't even connected. I caught him once measuring our grass with a ruler, our grass, and when I asked what he was doing, he said, "Unregulated blade height disrupts aesthetic harmony." I blinked. "It's a lawn, dude." He just smirked and walked off. At first, it was funny. Grandpa would chuckle, sipping his coffee, saying, "Folks like that run out of steam eventually." But then the water bill came, $187, triple what it should have been. Our private well, the one Grandpa installed himself in '79, was suddenly running dry. His roses started wilting, and that's when I noticed the muddy trench snaking from our backyard toward Karen's property. She'd built a community garden, a gaudy mess of daisies and a birdbath that looked like it belonged in a Vegas casino, and somehow her irrigation system was siphoning our water. I confronted her, standing in her driveway as she pruned her stolen flowers. "Oh, Josh," she cooed, "water's a shared resource. It's for the greater good." I pointed at the dying roses. "Tell that to Grandpa's garden." She just smiled and clipped another stem. That night, I couldn't sleep. Grandpa's hesitation before turning on the hose the next morning broke something in me. This wasn't about rules or flowers. It was about her stomping on the one thing keeping him grounded. So I got creative. Our well had a secondary tank, mostly for runoff, dishwater, laundry rinse, nothing toxic, but definitely not rose-friendly. I rigged a valve, rerouting it straight into Karen's precious irrigation lines. Call it neighborly compost tea. For 2 days, I watched her water her garden with it, oblivious, while her daisies turned a sickly yellow. She blamed it on air pollution from a barbecue down the street. I sipped my tea and smiled. But Mike wasn't laughing. That Saturday, as Grandpa watered what was left of his roses, Mike marched over, red-faced, clutching that clipboard. "Your well's sabotaging our system," he barked. Grandpa raised an eyebrow, hose still in hand. "Son, I don't even know what you're talking about." Mike jabbed a finger at him. "Step away from that hose, old man," or he didn't finish. My mom, who'd been visiting from Cincinnati, burst out the back door, yelling, "Leave him alone." I grabbed my phone, hit record, and texted my Uncle Dave, FBI, no nonsense, and the family's secret weapon. 3 words, Mike's losing it. For minutes later, tires screeched. 2 dark SUVs rolled up, and out stepped Uncle Dave and his team, badges gleaming. Mike froze, clipboard dangling. Karen sprinted out, shrieking, "This is oppression." Dave didn't blink. "Ma'am, we're here about your little water heist." And sir, he turned to Mike, "Drop the attitude, or that clipboard's evidence." The hose slipped from Grandpa's hand, splashing Mike's sneakers. I swear the roses perked up right then and there. Across the street, Mrs. Emily Harper, a sweet widow who'd been watching from her porch, started clapping. Karen's reign was cracking, but this was just the beginning. Mike's ego and Karen's schemes were about to collide with something bigger, and I was ready to document every second of it. The air buzzed with tension as Uncle Dave's team fanned out across Karen's lawn, their boots sinking into the soggy mess of her community garden. I stood there, heart pounding, phone still rolling, capturing every glorious second of her meltdown. Karen's face was a fireworks show of panic, eyes wide, mouth flapping like a fish out of water, while Mike just stared at the SUVs, his clipboard trembling in his sweaty grip. Grandpa Sam shuffled back to the porch, grabbed his sweet tea, and muttered, "Well, that's one way to water the weeds." I couldn't help it. I laughed, loud and raw, the kind of laugh that bubbles up when you realize the universe just handed you a front-row seat to justice. But Karen wasn't done. Oh no. She spun on her heels, blonde bob bouncing, and jabbed a manicured finger at Uncle Dave. "This is harassment. I'm calling my lawyer," she screeched, voice hitting a pitch that made the neighborhood dogs howl. Dave, all 6'2" of him, didn't flinch. He just held up a folder, thick, official, the kind of thing that screams you're in deep, and said, "Ma'am, we've got reports of unauthorized water diversion and fake HOA dues. You might want to save that call for yourself." Her jaw dropped, and for a split second, I saw it. Fear. Real, unfiltered fear. It felt like a jolt of electricity straight to my chest. After weeks of her nonsense, I was finally watching her squirm. Across the street, Mrs. Harper was still clapping, now joined by old Mr. Thompson, who'd hobbled out with his cane, grinning like it was Christmas morning. "Give him hell, Sammy," he yelled, waving at Grandpa. The energy was contagious, neighbors poking heads out windows, phones up, filming the chaos like it was the Super Bowl. I zoomed in on Karen as she scrambled for her phone, muttering about federal overreach, while Mike tried to puff out his chest, stammering, "I'm security, I've got rights." Dave's partner, Agent Lisa, shot him a look that could melt steel. "Sir, that vest doesn't make you a cop. Step back." I should have known it wouldn't end there. That night, after the SUVs pulled away and the crowd thinned, I sat with Grandpa on the porch, the crickets chirping like nothing had happened. He sipped his tea, calm as ever, but I could see the flicker in his eyes, the same one I'd seen when he talked about Nom. "She's not gonna let this go, Josh," he said, voice low. "Folks like her don't know when to quit." I nodded, replaying the day in my head. Karen's fake tears, Mike's pathetic swagger, the way the roses seemed to sigh in relief when her pipe stopped stealing our water. I thought we'd won. I was wrong. Next morning, I woke up to a flyer shoved in our mailbox. Bright red ink, bold caps, "Emergency Neighborhood Meeting. Restore order now." Signed, Karen, President, Maple Grove Standards Committee. Standards Committee? The woman had just been caught red-handed, and she was doubling down like a toddler throwing a tantrum in Target. I showed it to Grandpa, expecting him to laugh. He didn't. He just folded it, set it on the table, and said, "She's calling in reinforcements." My stomach twisted. Reinforcements? What, was she gonna roll up with a squad of clipboard-wielding Karens? Turns out, she didn't need a squad, just one guy. Enter Ryan Mitchell, a wiry dude in his late 40s with a receding hairline and a smirk that screamed, "I peaked in high school." I spotted him that afternoon, knocking on doors with a stack of papers, wearing a polo shirt with MGSC stitched on it, Maple Grove Standards Committee, her new fake empire. He hit Mrs. Harper's place first, leaning in close, talking fast. She shook her head, slammed the door, and I caught her muttering, "Not again." Then he moved to Mr. Thompson's, who listened for a minute before waving him off with his cane. By the time Ryan reached our street, I was waiting, arms crossed, on the front steps. "Josh, right?" he said, all fake charm, extending a hand I didn't take. "Karen's told me about your resistance. We're just trying to keep this neighborhood beautiful." I snorted. "Beautiful like her swamp of a garden?" His smile tightened. "Look, we're offering a fresh start. Voluntary contributions, $200 a quarter, to fund community upgrades. Sign here." He shoved a form at me, bogus legalese, fake logos, the works. I pushed it back. "We don't have an HOA, Ryan. Take your scam somewhere else." He didn't budge, just stared at me like I'd insulted his dog. "You'll regret that," he said, then turned and marched off. That night, I couldn't shake it, the audacity, the nerve. Karen wasn't just back. She'd upgraded her game, roping in Ryan to play bad cop to her queen bee. I checked the footage from our ring cam. Yep, there he was, 7:42 p.m., taping another flyer to our door. Notice of violation, non-compliant sprinkler system. I laughed, but it was hollow. Grandpa's roses were barely hanging on, and now they were coming for the hose that kept them alive? I grabbed my laptop, started a folder, Karen's Revenge, and dumped every photo, video, and flyer into it. If she wanted to fight, I'd give her one she'd never forget. Meanwhile, across town, Uncle Dave was already digging. He called me at 9 p.m., voice clipped. "Josh, that woman's been collecting dues from half the block, $3, 506 months, all cash or Venmo. We're building a case, but she's slippery. Watch your back." I hung up, adrenaline surging. Karen wasn't just a pest, she was a grifter, and Ryan was her new muscle. I glanced at Grandpa, asleep in his recliner, the hose coiled by the door like a loyal pet. This wasn't just about water anymore. It was about family, about dignity, about not letting some petty tyrant steal the last thing that made him smile. The sun hadn't even peeked over the rooftops when I heard it, a sharp hiss followed by a sputter. I bolted out of bed, heart hammering, and raced to the backyard. There was Grandpa Sam, standing in his plaid pajamas, staring at our well pump like it had just betrayed him. The hose lay limp in his hands, dribbling a pathetic trickle onto the parched dirt. His roses, those stubborn, beautiful survivors, drooped like they were mourning. "Pressure's gone," he said, voice quiet but edged with something I hadn't heard since I was a kid: defeat. I clenched my fists, heat rising in my chest. Karen. It had to be her. I stormed to the well, flipped open the access panel, and there it was, a tangle of cheap PVC pipes snaking off toward her property, spliced into our system like a parasite. She'd tapped us again, bolder this time, probably with Ryan's help. My blood boiled. This wasn't just theft. It was a gut punch to Grandpa, a man who'd fought for every inch of this life. I grabbed my phone, snapped photos of the mess, and texted Uncle Dave, "She's back at it. Well's compromised." His reply came fast, on it. "Stay calm." Calm? I wanted to rip those pipes out with my bare hands, but I knew better. Evidence first, revenge second. By noon, the neighborhood was buzzing. Mrs. Harper called me over, her voice shaky. "Josh, that Ryan fella came by again. Said if I didn't pay $200 for irrigation upgrades, they'd report my porch swing to the city. It's mint green. Been there 15 years. I could hear the hurt in her words, the same hurt I'd seen in Grandpa's eyes. Then Mr. Thompson texted me a blurry photo of a flyer on his door. Final notice: unapproved lawn decor. His ceramic turtle, a gift from his late wife, was circled in red marker. These weren't just threats. They were picking at old wounds, targeting people too kind to fight back. I couldn't sit still. I grabbed my laptop, synced the ring cam footage, and caught Ryan at 3 a.m., sneaking around our yard with a flashlight and a wrench. That smug little weasel, he thought he could play plumber and get away with it. I uploaded the clip to my Karen's Revenge folder, then printed out a stack of screenshots. If they wanted war, I'd make it public. I taped one to our mailbox with a note: "Caught on camera, Maple Grove's fake HOA at work." Within an hour, neighbors were texting me, some mad, some scared, all fed up. Mrs. Harper even taped her own sign: "Swing stays. Karen can shove it." That afternoon, Karen called her emergency meeting in her driveway, standing on a milk crate like she was Abraham Lincoln delivering the Gettysburg Address. Ryan flanked her, arms crossed, scanning the crowd of 20 or so retirees like he was Secret Service. I stood at the back, phone rolling, heart thumping with a mix of rage and glee. Maple Grove deserves order. Karen bellowed, waving a laminated standards manual she'd clearly made at Kinko's. Non-compliance fees start Monday, $50 for every violation. Together, we'll build a utopia. A utopia built on stolen water and bullied seniors? I nearly laughed out loud. But then sweet Mrs. Patel, 78 and barely 5 feet tall, stepped forward, her voice trembling but fierce. "You made me repaint my house last month, $1, $200 out of my savings, because my blue was too bold. There's no HOA, Karen. You're a liar." The crowd murmured, heads nodding. Ryan smirked, leaning in to whisper something to Karen, but she brushed him off, eyes blazing. "That's slander, Linda. Pay up or face consequences." Mrs. Patel clutched her purse, tears welling, and I felt it, A white-hot surge of fury. This wasn't funny anymore. It was personal. I pushed through the crowd, holding up my phone. Consequences? How about this, Karen? I've got video of Ryan sabotaging our well last night. And receipts, $4, $200 you scammed from this block alone. Gasps rippled through the group. Mr. Thompson banged his cane on the pavement, yelling, thieves. Karen's face went beet red, but she doubled down, shrieking, that's edited. You're jealous of my vision. Ryan stepped forward, chest puffed. Back off, Josh, or I cut him off. Or what? You'll measure my grass again. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some shouting at Karen, chaos breaking loose. That's when Uncle Dave's SUV rolled up, silent but unmistakable. He didn't get out, just parked, window down, watching. Karen froze mid-rant, and Ryan's bravado melted like ice cream in July. The meeting dissolved, folks scattering, but the energy lingered. Back home, Grandpa was on the porch, tinkering with the well pump. Fixed it, he said, wiping his hands. Swapped the lines, her garden's getting dishwater again. I grinned, picturing her daisies drowning in suds. You're a legend, Grandpa. But the next morning, a new flyer hit every doorstep. Maple Grove Standards Committee, Phase 2, compliance inspections begin. Karen wasn't retreating, she was reloading. And Ryan? He'd left a handwritten note in our mailbox. You're not the only one with cameras. My pulse spiked. They were watching us too. I glanced at Grandpa, watering his roses with a quiet smile, and felt a pang, pride, worry, determination all at once. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Meanwhile, in Cincinnati, Uncle Dave was briefing his team, flipping through my screenshots. She's running a racket, extortion dressed up as HOA fees. We're close, Josh. Keep documenting. I nodded to myself, staring at Ryan's note. Let them watch. I give them a show they'd never forget. The dawn light barely touched the rooftops when I caught the glint of something off in Karen's yard, a tripod, a lens, pointed straight at our house. My stomach flipped, a mix of dread and adrenaline surging through me like a shot of espresso. Ryan's note wasn't a bluff. They'd set up a camera, right there in her soggy daisy patch, watching us like we were the criminals. I stormed inside, grabbed my laptop, and pulled up our own footage. Sure enough, 2:17 a.m., Ryan, hunched over, fiddling with that tripod while Karen hovered nearby, whispering like they were plotting a heist. Grandpa, I called, voice cracking with urgency. He shuffled out, tea in hand, and peered at the screen. Huh, he said, calm as ever. Guess they don't sleep much. I wanted to scream, to march over and smash that thing to bits, but Grandpa put a hand on my shoulder. Josh, they're digging their own hole. Let's fill it. His eyes sparkled, that old vet cunning kicking in, and I felt it, a spark of hope, sharp and bright. We weren't just fighting back anymore. We were about to turn the tables so hard they'd never see it coming. I grinned, grabbed my phone, and texted the neighborhood group chat. Karen's watching us. Time to give her a show. Meet at my place, noon. By 11:45, the porch was packed, Mrs. Harper with her iced lemonade, Mr. Thompson leaning on his cane, Mrs. Patel clutching a stack of old paint receipts, and half a dozen others, all buzzing with a mix of nerves and defiance. I stood on a chair, heart pounding, and held up Ryan's note. They think they can scare us, I said, voice loud enough to carry across the street. But we've got something they don't proof, guts, and each other. Mrs. Harper raised her glass. And a swing they'll never take. The group cheered, and I swear I saw Grandpa's chest puff up a little, pride flickering in his steady gaze. We hatched a plan. Nothing illegal, just pure, glorious chaos. Step 1. Overload their camera. At 1 p.m., Mr. Thompson rolled his ancient lawnmower to the edge of our yard, revving it like a Harley while Mrs. Patel blasted her grandkid's boombox, 80s pop so loud it rattled the windows. I hooked up Grandpa's hose to a sprinkler, cranked it full blast, and aimed it just shy of Karen's property line, a shimmering wall of water glinting in the sun. Across the street, Karen burst out her door, shrieking, "This is a violation." Ryan fumbled with his tripod, yelling, "Cut that noise." But we didn't stop. We danced. Grandpa even shuffled a few steps, pose in hand, laughing like I hadn't heard in years. Step 2. Flip the script. I printed flyers, simple, bold, Maple Grove truth. No HOA, no fees, just Karen's lies. Underneath, a QR code linked to a Google Drive with every shred of evidence, ring cam clips, fake notices, even a photo of her swampy garden. We split up, taping them to mailboxes, lampposts, every damn tree in sight. Mrs. Harper hit the east side, cackling as she went, while Mr. Thompson took the west, muttering, "Take that, you clipboard clown." I watched Karen's face twist through her window, rage, panic, disbelief all at once, and felt a rush so sweet it almost hurt. By dusk, the neighborhood was a war zone of petty rebellion. Someone, probably Mr. Larson, parked his rusty pickup right in front of Karen's house, honking the horn every 10 minutes by accident. Mrs. Patel strung twinkle lights on her too-bold blue porch, bright enough to signal aliens. And Grandpa? He planted a new rose bush, right where Ryan's pipes had been, whispering, "Grow strong, little fighter." My chest ached with pride, but also worry Karen wasn't yelling anymore. She was quiet. Too quiet. That night, Uncle Dave called, voice tight. "Josh, we traced her Venmo $5, 800 total, funneled to an account under Ryan's name. They're sloppy, but desperate. Feds are drafting a cease and desist. Keep the pressure on." I hung up, staring at the dark shape of Karen's house across the street. The camera was still there, red light blinking like an angry eye. Then a new flyer slipped under our door. Maple Grove Standards Committee, final warning. Submit or face audit. Audit? By who? Her printer? I laughed, but it stuck in my throat. They were cornered, and cornered rats bite. Next morning, I woke to a text from Mrs. Harper. Check Ryan's yard. I ran outside, and there it was, a sign, big and ugly. Property under MGSC protection. Protection? More like possession. He'd staked out half the block, claiming authority over lawns, fences, even Mr. Thompson's turtle. My phone buzzed again. "Mr. Larson, they cut my water line." Hose is dead. Then Mrs. Patel. "My lights are gone. Wire snipped." My hand shook. This wasn't just petty anymore. It was sabotage. I looked at Grandpa, watering his new rose with a bucket, jaw set like he was back in the jungle. "They're scared, Josh," he said. "Scared people get stupid." I grabbed my laptop, uploaded the latest clips, Ryan's sign, the cut wires, the whole damn circus, and posted it to Nextdoor with a caption, "Karen and Ryan's reign of terror caught red-handed." Within hours, it had 300 views, comments flooding in. "Call the cops." "Sewer. I'm in. Let's end this." The neighborhood wasn't just mad. They were ready to fight. I glanced at Grandpa, his hand steady on that bucket, and felt it. We weren't alone anymore. Karen's empire was crumbling, and we were the ones swinging the hammer. Meanwhile, in Uncle Dave's Cincinnati office, he pinned a photo of Ryan's sign to a board, muttering, "Gotcha, punk." The feds were closing in, but out here in Maple Grove, we weren't waiting. We were rewriting the rules, one rose, one flyer, one defiant dance at a time. The air crackled with defiance as dusk settled over Maple Grove, painting the sky orange and gold. I stood on the porch, heart racing, watching Grandpa Sam kneel by his new rose bush, coaxing it with a gentle stream from an old watering can. That tiny plant, stubborn, green, alive, was our flag in the ground, a quiet screw you to Karen and Ryan's tyranny. But across the street, her house loomed like a storm cloud, that stupid camera still blinking, mocking us. My phone buzzed. "Mrs. Harper, they're at it again. Ryan's got a megaphone." A megaphone? I bolted to the window, and there he was, strutting down the block, barking orders like a discount drill sergeant. "Non-compliant properties will be flagged. Pay up or pack up." My fists clenched. This wasn't over. They were swinging wild now, desperate to claw back control. I ran outside, phone in hand, filming as Ryan's voice echoed off the houses. Neighbors spilled onto their lawns, Mr. Thompson shaking his cane, Mrs. Patel clutching her broom like a weapon, Mr. Larson revving his truck just to drown him out. "You've got no authority, you clown." Larson yelled, and the crowd roared, a raw, electric wave of fury and hope. I zoomed in on Ryan's face, sweaty, red, cracking under the pressure, then panned to Karen, storming out her door in yoga pants and a headset, screaming, "This is mutiny." "Mutiny? Lady, this wasn't your pirate ship. It was our home." That's when it hit me. We couldn't just react anymore. We had to strike. I rallied the crew back at the house, adrenaline pumping like I'd downed 3 Red Bulls. "They're flailing," I said, voice trembling with excitement. "Let's bury them in their own game." Mrs. Harper grinned, slamming her lemonade glass down. "I've got an idea. My nephew's a lawyer. He'll draft a letter, scare him straight." Mr. Thompson chuckled. "I'll call Channel 7. They love a good circus." My chest swelled. These weren't just neighbors. They were warriors, and I was damn proud to stand with them. By morning, the plan was rolling. Mrs. Harper's nephew faxed over a cease and desist, legal jargon so thick it could choke a horse, demanding Karen and Ryan halt their unauthorized operations or face civil action. We printed 50 copies, stuffed them in every mailbox, and watched the chaos unfold. Mr. Thompson's news tip paid off too. A Channel 7 van pulled up at noon. A perky reporter named Sarah hopping out with a mic. "We hear there's a rogue HOA scamming seniors," she said, eyeing Karen's house. I handed her my folder. Videos, flyers, Venmo screenshots, the works. "It's all here," I said, voice steady but burning. "They're grifters, and we're done." Sarah's crew set up across from Karen's soggy garden, filming as she burst out, waving her laminated manual like a shield. "This is fake news," she shrieked, but the camera caught her tripping over a hose, landing butt first in the mud. Ryan tried to help, megaphone blaring feedback, and the whole block erupted in laughter. Deep, cathartic, unstoppable. I glanced at Grandpa, leaning on the porch rail, a rare grin splitting his face. "That's what you call a faceplant," he said, and I felt tears prick my eyes. Not sad, just pure, overwhelming joy. But the knockout punch came at 3 p.m. Uncle Dave's SUV rolled in, this time with backup. 2 more feds, badges out, no smiles. He marched to Karen's door, knocked once, and handed her a folder. "Federal investigation, ma'am. Fraud, harassment, theft. Pick your poison. You too, Mitchell." Ryan's megaphone hit the ground with a sad little thunk. Karen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound, just a fish gasping for air. Dave turned to me, winked, and said, "Good work, kid. We've got him cold. $6, 200 traced, plus 18 complaints filed." My knees nearly buckled. 18? The neighborhood had spoken, loud and clear. Across town, Sarah's live broadcast hit the airwaves. Maple Grove residents fight back against a fake HOA empire. Full story at 6. Phones lit up. Texts, calls, next-door pings. "Saw it on TV. They're toast. Thank you, Josh." I sank into a porch chair, exhausted but buzzing, watching Grandpa water his rose bush. The petals glowed in the fading light, stronger than ever, and I felt it. A weight lifting, a victory sinking in. Karen's camera was gone by nightfall, ripped out by Ryan in a huff as he stormed inside. Her flyer stopped. Her voice went silent. But then, a twist. The next day, a letter arrived, not from Karen, but typed, official, from the city. "Maple Grove commended for exposing fraudulent schemes. Your evidence may aid regional training." I read it aloud, voice shaking, and Grandpa laughed. A full, belly-deep sound that echoed off the house. Training? Hell, I just wanted my roses back. I hugged him, hard, the kind of hug you give when you realize you've won more than a fight. You've won back a piece of home. Meanwhile, in Cincinnati, Uncle Dave pinned Karen's photo to his wall, muttering, "One down, plenty to go." Back here, the block was alive, flags up, lawns loud with color, a quiet promise we'd never bow again. Karen's fake crown was dust, and we'd stomped it flat, together. The morning sun spilled over Maple Grove like a victory lap, warm and golden, kissing the petals of Grandpa Sam's rose bush as he stood there, watering can in hand, humming some old tune from the 60s. I leaned against the porch rail, coffee steaming in my mug, watching him with a lump in my throat I couldn't quite swallow. It had been 3 days since Karen's fake empire crashed, 3 days since the Channel 7 van peeled out, since Uncle Dave's feds hauled away her laminated lies, since Ryan's megaphone went quiet. The silence was deafening, but it wasn't empty. It was full of relief, of pride, of something we'd fought tooth and nail to take back. Peace. I sipped my coffee, replaying it all, the camera in her yard, the flyers, the way Mrs. Harper's nephew's letter turned Karen's face ghost white. That memory still sparked a grin, but what hit harder was yesterday. I'd walked out to find a little painted rock by the rose bush, red, white, and blue, with freedom scrawled in a kid's shaky handwriting. Then another showed up, yellow, thanks. And by noon, there were a dozen, a tiny rainbow of gratitude from neighbors I barely knew. I showed Grandpa, expecting a quip. He just nodded, eyes soft, and said, "Folks remember, Josh. That's what matters." My chest tightened. Pride? Yes, but something deeper, like roots sinking into soil I hadn't known was mine. Across the street, Karen's house sat dark, curtains drawn, that soggy garden rotting into a sad, brown smear. Word was she'd packed up half her stuff, muttering about moving to a real community. Ryan's truck hadn't moved in days. Someone said he'd been seen at the hardware store, buying paint thinner, probably to scrub that MGSE logo off his ego. I didn't care where they went, as long as it wasn't here. But the neighborhood? It was alive. Mr. Thompson had his turtle back out, now with a tiny flag taped to its shell. Mrs. Patel strung new lights, brighter, bluer, a middle finger to Karen's too bold rule. Mr. Larson's truck blared country tunes, and Mrs. Harper's swing creaked happily under her weight. We weren't just free, we were loud about it. That afternoon, I uploaded the final video. I'd spent hours editing, clips of Ryan's sabotage, Karen's mud flop, the news segment, all stitched together with sarcastic captions and a triumphant banjo track. The last shot was Grandpa, watering his roses, sunlight catching the spray like a halo. I titled it, How Maple Grove Ditched a Dictator, with a hose and a hunch, and hit post. By evening, it had 80,000 views, comments rolling in like a tidal wave, legendary. Grandpa's my hero. Karen's Denizo. I read a few aloud to him, grinning. He just shrugged, wiping dirt off his hands. All I did was water my plants, Josh. You're the one who made it a movie. But the real kicker came at sunset. A knock on the door, soft, hesitant. I opened it to a guy in his 20s, nervous, holding a letter. I'm Tyler, he said, shifting on his feet. My grandma lived here years ago. She saw your video, said it gave her chills. She's too sick to travel, but she wanted you to have this. He handed it over, a note, shaky cursive. Sam, Josh, thank you for fighting. I lost my garden to an HOA bully once. Seeing you win brought it back a little. Stay strong. Tucked inside was a photo, an old woman, smiling, next to a rose bush just like Grandpa's. I handed it to him, voice catching. He read it slow, then looked up, eyes glistening. Worth more than a medal, he said, quiet, and pulled me into a hug that said everything words couldn't. We invited Tyler in for pie, apple, Grandma's recipe, and sat on the porch as the stars came out, talking about nothing and everything. The neighborhood hummed around us. Laughter, a dog barking, the faint hiss of Grandpa's hose as he gave the roses one last drink. This is it, huh? I said, half to myself. Liberty. Grandpa chuckled. Nah, Josh. It's just home. We kept it blooming. I smiled, warmth spreading through me like roots unfurling, anchoring me here, to this block, these people, this fight we'd won together. Next morning, the city letter got a reply. They wanted us to Zoom with some officials, share our story for a training program. I set it up, but Grandpa waved it off. You talk, kid. I'll be with the roses. Fair enough, he'd earned it. The call went smooth. They loved the footage, the grit, even laughed at my captions. Maple Grove's a case study now, the guy said. You turned a scam into a lesson. I hung up, buzzing, and posted one last update. We're official, Karen's toast, and Grandpa's roses are famous. Drop a comment. What's your petty tyrant story? Let's keep this going. By nightfall, the views hit 200,000, comments pouring in. Tales of rogue HOAs, nosy neighbors, petty revenge with sprinklers and spite fences. I scrolled through, laughing, then froze on one. My dad says thanks. He's planting again. Attached, a photo of an old man, shovel in hand, grinning by a patch of dirt. I showed Grandpa. He nodded, slow, then grabbed his watering can. Guess we started something, he said, and headed out to the roses, steady as ever. So here we are, Maple Grove, unbowed, growing. No fake crowns, no clipboards, just us, our lawns, our stories. If you've stuck with me this far, hit that subscribe. I've got more where this came from.